Welcome. I am Daisy, your hostess. In the book titled Fragments of Truth, Infinite Intelligence, God, and Day of Judgment, Richard and Isabella Ingalese, which we will be getting in a few, explore the concept of God and encourage a deeper awareness of a divine intelligence guiding the unfolding of creation. And they suggest that, as most sages who have pondered on the same issue throughout the ages and have come to the same message, that from a hyperopic point of view, one can see the whole of what we know as Earth, with all its components on it, trees, water, humans. It is seen as a unit, and this place we call Earth, as one thing interdependent upon the other, existing within the cosmos. And seen from that perspective, it's a wonder when we zoom in to each individual life, what we see from the ground view is a cacophony of egos fighting to coexist. Not a wonder libraries are filled with stories of conquest, where a leader rises and controls are placed to avoid uprising of the multitude. And stories exist telling of chaos that comes after such oppression, trumpeting justice and fairness. And what is that something? What is that something that causes the desire for justice and balance to come back in fairness? Something ineffable, something that we can't touch, something that some of us call God. But is it more than that? For those that kind of see more into it, is it truth? Is it an unspoken truth? The heirs of justice and fairness eventually persevere. Only to do what? To start anew, in hopes that the best of the race moves on. And that's what philosophers and many are searching. What is that? Where is that creator? Where is he? How can I connect to that? Where did I come from? And I'll use that as my segue to make a comment on the chapter on Judgment Day. And I'm no guru, I have climbed no mountain, yet if life is the test, I can attest that true judgment is an ongoing process of self-awareness and inner reflection, rather than that single catastrophic event. Our thoughts, our actions, and intentions shape our spiritual evolution and determine our growth, and the consequences are cause and effect of all those thoughts and decisions we made. And hence, it is that life, that traveling through the gauntlet of tribulation, that we, like a carbon stone, become brilliant as a diamond. The facets that shine are the semblance of compassion, self-responsibility, and the pursuit of inner purity, should we have the endurance to deal with all the challenges that we are faced. And it is through these that we become awakened and liberated from the shackles of illusion and fear. I look forward to your comments. If you just found me at this video, please make sure to hop over to my playlist and grab the previous chapters. And with that, I now turn the page. Chapter 13, Infinite Intelligence. God. When this great period of evolution began, there were but two principles in the universe. One, the infinite intelligence desiring expression, and the other, the infinite out of which infinite intelligence had come. Within infinite intelligence, there were two primal active forces, and both of these were composed of infinitesimal particles of vibrating force, which may now be called atoms. One of these forces was constructive and the other was destructive. The atoms composing the constructive force rotated from left to right, but the atoms that composed the destructive force rotated from right to left. The force that was to be constructive during this period of evolution was composed of such atoms as had evolved through experiences gained in many other evolutionary periods. While the destructive force was composed of atoms that had not had so many experiences in other periods, were of a lower of vibration and therefore were of an inferior order. But all the atoms which composed the two forces had been expressed in forms before this period and were now again seeking more experiences for further expression. These two primal forces could be compared with two great streams of water passing in opposite directions through a vast cloud of unresisting, motionless vapor, and this vapor may be called the unmanifested infinite principle. The unmanifested infinite principle is boundless. It never has been expressed in forms, but in the eons to come, it will be expressed, as the primal, destructive force needs reinforcement. There never was a form made that was positively and entirely on the constructive side of nature until the atoms of which it was composed had previously passed through inharmonious conditions and had been changed from the destructive to the constructive side. And so it is that the constructive force is constantly absorbing from the destructive force, or current, such atoms or particles as are ready, by reason of their past unpleasant experiences as destructionists, to change their inharmonious vibrations and begin service in the constructive force. And the destructive force, to prevent its diminution, is reinforced by absorbing into itself from the vast cloud of non-resisting negative vapor a sufficient amount of that vapor to enable it to continue its work in the evolutionary scheme. The natures of the two great primal forces are diametrically opposed. The nature of the constructive force is to attract atoms into forms. The nature of the destructive force is to disintegrate forms. The first force is positively evolutionary, the second force is negatively devolutionary, and each operates according to its nature and succeeds in its efforts according to its strength or power. And thus infinite intelligence is composed of two natures, the higher and the lower, the constructive and the destructive, and both are necessary in the great evolutionary scheme, since there could be no equilibrium in the universe without the operation of each. The desire to attract or to accumulate is conducive of harmony in infinite intelligence or mind, and the desire to disintegrate is productive of disharmony. Harmony is happiness and is supposed to be good, while disharmony is unhappiness and is believed to be evil, yet both conditions are expressed by infinite mind and are parts of its nature. This brings the conclusion that infinite mind or intelligence is both good and evil, and that it began this evolutionary period with both aspects of its nature in readiness to operate as occasion required. There is no waste among atoms composing infinite intelligence or mind, since nothing can escape from the universe. This is because nothing can get beyond its attracting force, which operates everywhere. Forms may be destroyed and atoms may be dispersed to remote places, but no part of infinite mind can be lost. There is no way by which infinite mind can gain experience except through expression of itself in forms. And so the creation of forms was the first step of progress in the evolutionary scheme of infinite intelligence or mind. Before a form can be destroyed, it must first be created. And so it seems that during this period of evolution, the constructive or creative force of infinite mind began to operate first, and putting into execution its attracting or constructive powers, it began to attract some of its atoms together for the purpose of expressing its thoughts in material forms. In its beginning, a form is an expression of a thought, and it may be an old thought in a new garb, and so when infinite mind began thinking suns and worlds in the beginning of this period of evolution, they had to come into existence as forms and take their prospective places in the universe. That those creations were old thoughts and new forms must be realized, since they could not have sprung into existence in such numbers and in such perfection unless the thoughts which created them had been clothed before in similar garbs. Infinite mind had created cosmic forms in previous evolutionary periods and was again repeating its creations on a larger scale and with more perfect expressions due to its knowledge gained from past experiences. And when each orb had been established in its proper place in infinite intelligence, and when the machinery of cosmos was moving regularly and without friction, then infinite mind desired further expressions of thought. It desired that there should be living, moving, breathing expressions of itself. It had clothed the hills of its worlds with verdure, and it had decorated the plains and valleys with trees and flowers and grasses. Springs of cool, delicious water gushed, or trickled from the mountain sides, or sprang from beneath the rocks on the plains or in the valleys. Some of the trees and shrubs bore fruit in their seasons, and the earth brought forth roots and herbs that were good for food and medicines. There were fish swimming in the seas and lakes and rivers, and all these were the material expressions of some of the thoughts of infinite mind that had been eons in the process of creation. Each created thing was now fulfilling its mission and was obeying the laws that infinite mind had made for it. And still unsatisfied, it wished for more experiences. It desired that its thoughts of determination, responsibility, persistency, and strong individuality should also be expressed in forms. And then the birds and fowl were made, and were imbued with the desire to mate and to reproduce their forms, and to be, each, responsible for a season for the welfare of its family. After the fowl and birds, then came the animal forms, and they also were imbued with all the thoughts that infinite mind had expressed in birds and fowls, and added to these animal minds were the desires for greater powers of endurance and the more physical strength. During the ages that passed, while infinite mind was expressing itself in the various forms of birds and animals, its destructive force began to manifest. Different natures were developed as the results of necessity and of the different experiences of infinite mind. There were new aspects of thought which produced different conditions and different modes of living. In its desire to express strong individuality among the birds and animals, the destructive force obsessed the minds of some of the creatures, and birds of prey and carnivorous beasts were evolved. These creatures were the direct result of some of the inharmonious thoughts which infinite mind sometimes expressed. For there were the two forces equally active in infinite mind, and each force, being a part of it, had to manifest in forms. And so it was there, in the animal kingdom, that the struggle between the constructive and destructive forces of infinite mind began. In this period of evolution, and both forces have been manifesting ever since. Ages passed while infinite mind was working in the animal kingdom, and then came a time when it, still unsatisfied, desired to express itself in a higher form. It desired a form with a better brain made of finer, more rapidly vibrating atoms, since further possibilities of evolvement had now been exhausted in the then existing brain of the four-footed creatures. It must evolve another form that could and would respond to higher thoughts than those of procreation and of reproduction of itself. This new form and brain must not only contain all the instincts of the animal, but it must possess more than these. And then a form was made that stood upright and walked upon 2 feet instead of 4, and infinite mind imbued this brain with more mind. From itself, the finite mind, or man, was born. With these new forms, or infinite mind's expression, another age began. In external appearance, this new creation differed very little from many other animal forms. It walked upright, when not excited, and, like many other animals, was covered with a thick coat of coarse hair. Its skin also was coarse, but not so thick as were the skins of some of the other larger animals. Its nose was not so long, and its face and head were more expressive of intelligence. It had hands with fingers and feet with toes instead of claws and hoofs, but its instincts were animal-like and its disposition fierce. Constructiveness and destructiveness were both manifested in its nature, with the destructive force predominant, and it was of a strong individuality possessing prodigious physical strength. Everything considered, this new form was an advancement made in the evolvement of an animal form and possessed much greater possibilities. With the birth of these new creation began a diminution in size of other large animal forms, and gradually the mammoth creatures that had roamed this earth began to disappear. This was because the creative force of infinite mind was producing more intelligent creatures now, for it had learned that through more forms and brains, greater and more valuable experiences were to be gained than through large forms with less brains. It had also learned that to move many smaller forms required less force than to move one large one, and here came the first lesson in economy of force for infinite mind. Infinite mind had not reached perfection in all its parts when it began its work on the morning of this great period of evolution, nor has it reached perfection yet, nor will it ever reach perfection, so far as can be seen today. For what seemed to be perfection once is imperfection now, and so long as infinite mind remains unsatisfied and desires greater and more experiences for expression of itself, there will be no end to its evolvement, and its perfected states will always be comparative. When infinite mind created the human animal form and brain, it bestowed upon it the power to think more clearly than had any of its previous creations done. The molecular vibrations of this new brain were greater, and its thoughts were possible of being more constructive and creative than were those of any other brain. It had a finite mind in contradistinction to an animal mind, and it became a link in the evolutionary chain which binds the animal to the infinite. One of the duties of this finite mind is to train the animal mind to a higher state of consciousness, and since there were no more animal minds to be created on this earth after finite mind was born, this task is not an overwhelming one, but it was, and is, a responsibility added to finite mind that has not been given to any animal mind. And it is a responsibility for which finite mind will be held accountable to infinite mind. But responsibilities are necessary to the development of reason and of good judgment, and finite mind needed that responsibility and will need many more as time goes on. Simultaneously with its beginning to economize its forces, infinite mind began using the same animal minds again and again in newly created forms. This was done in order that all possibilities of development should be exhausted in one form before that animal mind should pass on into another. And so incarnation was followed by reincarnation in the animal kingdom, and the evolvement of animal minds to higher states of consciousness began. The greatest crime in all the universe that can be committed against infinite mind is persistent and continued retrogression. This crime brings annihilation or reabsorption of an individual mind back into the infinite. This is the one great sin for which there is no forgiveness and absolute mental death, as an individual mind awaits the perpetrator. But it is only the finite mind who can commit this crime, since it alone has absolute free will, which gives it the power to choose what it will do. The animal has not free will, and therefore cannot make an evolutionary choice for itself. Its progress is controlled by infinite will, and it is forced onward and upward from the lowest state of consciousness or expression, step by step, from incarnation through reincarnation, until it has evolved to where it may use the human animal form and brain. And even then it may not choose what it will do, and not until intuition, a spiritual attribute bestowed upon it by infinite mind, has come to lead it, has it the power to choose its path. To avoid a retrogression or even an appearance of it, In any form, infinite mind compels the incarnating animal mind to repeat again and again its experiences in every form of expression that it uses, never going backward for any cause whatever, but always pushing onward to higher forms. For it is the essence which has been retained from the most important experiences of animal mind in all the various forms that it has used, which makes the animal mind evolve. This essence cannot be called a memory, since the incidents which produced it are forgotten. But there has been awakened in its mind a fear of disaster, which followed the committing of certain acts, and thus it was that fear became an instinctive element that helped to control the animal's behavior. Someone has said that self-preservation is the first law of nature. This is true, but the element of fear is always the direct cause for the acceleration of movement which leads the animal mind in that direction. Ages passed and finite mind progressed and grew in power. Its thought creations also grew in numbers and in strength. Where once it had been satisfied with caves and hollow trees for habitations, it now desired more commodious homes, and where once each finite mind had served itself, it now desired to be served. And such minds as were strongest and most positive imposed their thoughts upon the weaker and lesser magnetic minds and made them slaves. Slavery is the material manifestation of the results of selfish thoughts and of indolent desires. In essence, it is dishonesty, since it demands that something shall be given in exchange for nothing to be received. It works in opposition to the law of reciprocity and originated in the lowest realm of the selfish finite mind. It provides a rapid means by which a strongly individualized mind may make accumulations of material things, and in this respect aids that mind in expressing its cupidity. But eventually it brings mental and physical degeneration, since it provides a means of gratifying what mind in its indolent desires. Slavery removes the necessity for the slaveholder to think or to act for himself, and stultification is the result of mental and physical inactivity. Slavery also provides a means to gratify the desire to rule and to be obeyed by other minds. And it is here that the enslaving finite mind, through gratification of its selfishness, becomes a monarch, feared or hated by other minds according to the way it rules them. Anciently, when finite minds were in their infancy, the enslaving mind had the power to create or to destroy human forms according to its will. And because such power rested in a single individual, that ruling mind became an uncontrolled master of cruelty who killed or tortured any living thing within the realm it ruled, if it desired so to do. For everything that lived within that realm belonged to it. Every child born to it or to its subjects was its slave. And to enlarge its realm and to acquire more slaves, its own procreative powers were sometimes overdone. Then it was made a crime, punishable with death, for any female, finite mind to refuse to bring forth children. And it mattered not how ill she was or how wretched were her surroundings. Motherhood was forced upon her annually, as it is upon stock by stock breeders of today. It was in that barbaric age that the present thought originated that female finite minds are giving glory to God by multiplying and replenishing the earth with human animal forms. And the feeble-minded creatures, as well as the laboring, suffering millions of finite minds who starve and slave for just enough to live and breathe today, are the results of ancient slavery days when one finite mind ruled all other finite minds in its community. In ancient days, this cruelty to mothers was perpetrated in order that the ruler then should have more slaves and more possessions, and should grow richer and more powerful through the labor of the hands and feet of all the finite minds it owned. Now the belief that female finite minds must still continue to bring forth children in large numbers is due to the same old selfish thought which, like the shadows of the past, rests upon the church and state today. For underneath and cunningly hidden from the casual observer are now the same greedy thoughts which actuated ancient monarchs in their desire for slaves. The church wants more devotees to support its priests and its institutions, and the state or nation wants supporters for its officers and its armies. So now as then, the female finite minds are impressed that they must bear the burdens of giving birth to more children than they can provide for. The demand for war brides through which the state or nation could replenish its losses to its armies was evidence of that same selfish thought. And the fight against birth control that state and church are making is another evidence. It is not the fear of God's displeasure which actuates those finite minds, who frantically and furiously oppose a law which makes it possible for fewer but more highly developed finite minds to be born. But it is the fear of a loss of prestige, of power, and of wealth to those who control the destinies of the hordes of ignorant finite minds, who serve the rulers of both church and state. In ancient times, the ruling finite mind was not always satisfied with the obedience and abject servitude of its slaves. It wanted to be worshipped, and here was where the first idea of a god came into the finite minds of the enslaved. The slaves were told, and accepted the tale as true, that the ruler of their tribe was a superior being who was to be revered as well as feared. And here originated the belief in the divine right of kings. The enslaved believed their ruler was their god, and everything that happened to the tribe, for which they did not understand the cause, came through the power of their god and ruler. And so long as no misfortunes came, and all went well, this pretending finite mind was worshipped. But when the destructive force of infinite mind began its disintegrating work among them, and their god and ruler began to suffer with his slaves, then the first doubts arose among some of the enslaved, and the god and ruler found that some sort of an explanation must be made to save him from a loss of prestige. When drought or flood or fire destroyed the possessions of their god, and when disease had made that god as miserable as themselves, the influence of that ruling finite mind began to wane. And then the tale was told to them that these misfortunes were the results of the work of another god, who, though invisible, also had the power to destroy, one who was wholly evil and therefore must be propitiated. That something must be given it, or it would ruin everyone and everything, that it had been sleeping and had now awakened hungry. This statement satisfied the ignorant enslaved finite minds, since they themselves had often wakened hungry and had been angrily disposed. And so they offered sacrifices to this new god of evil. They brought to it the things they liked best to eat and the things they liked best to have, and here originated in ignorant, enslaved, finite minds a belief in the power of the devil. And so it was that the visible results of the operation of the invisible force of the destructive power of infinite mind were attributed to the expressions of an angry god of evil who wanted sacrifices. And so that mythical personage, Satan, or the devil, was created by finite mind itself. And throughout all the ages that have intervened between that remote past and the present time, the devil has been feared and propitiated by ignorant, finite minds. With all religions and in every portion of this earth, the devil has held an equally prominent place with God, and a greater power has sometimes been accredited to the god of evil by religionists than they gave to the god of good. This was quite natural, since the destructive force of infinite mind destroys what, to the ignorant finite mind, seems good, and they do not know that old conditions must be destroyed in order that new and better ones may be created. Sometimes this destructive force of infinite mind has been described as an individual being who had the power to not only tempt and ruin character, but to actually abduct finite minds and bodies and carry them away to the realms it ruled. With some religionists, it seemed an intangible mental force or consciousness which they called mortal mind or error, and it was believed to have the power to penetrate into the innermost parts of finite mind, to tempt and to mislead it. Other religionists believed there were many devils, that one could not be doing destructive work everywhere at the same moment, and they multiplied their one original god of evil into many, and still there were scarcely enough to account for all the destruction that was done. But whether the beliefs were ancient or modern, all believers agreed that there must be a way to either propitiate or cheat the god of evil. And since it was first discovered, finite minds have been searching for a way to get the better of it, and still the destructive force of infinite mind continues its work with them and with their possessions. When ancient finite minds who ruled communities and tribes learned how easy it had been to shift the results of their ignorance and their helplessness to another god, and when they had learned how to distract the attention of their slaves and subjects from their own machinations to something or someone else, they conceived the plan to hide their personal selfish brutal desires behind the thing they called a government, and summoning to their aid such finite minds as could be used by them to do their bidding, they gave them names and titles and decorations. They bestowed upon them the things they did not want themselves, gave to each some trivial thing to do, and an aristocracy was created. A representative government was supposed to have been established. The next move made to get a stronger hold upon their subjects was to arouse a sentiment in the tribe or nation which would drive those enslaved finite minds to suffer and to sacrifice everything they possessed, even their lives, for the preservation of their ruler and their government, and then something that is now called patriotism was born. This sentiment among the slaves and subjects made it possible for rulers to declare war upon neighboring tribe or nation for a cause or without one, and blindly following all orders given by their rulers or by the aides appointed by their rulers, those frantic slaves, imbued with a hypnotic frenzy that had been put upon them by their priests or rulers, went forth to battle and to be slaughtered by the thousands. It is in the same old spirit, manifesting now that manifested in ancient times. The ruler of a nation and the small circle of finite minds who compose its aristocracy look greedily upon another nation, whose progress in efficiency and whose gain of material wealth it wishes to absorb. Some trivial thing occurs, perhaps an aristocrat is killed by a subject of the nation whose wealth is coveted, or perhaps a ship belonging to the covetous nation is sunk, and neither of these occurrences is believed to be a sufficient cause for war. Remember, the main becomes the war cry of a nation, and by making use of such an occurrence, the populace of a whole nation is driven into a frenzy of excitement. Then the greedy finite minds who rule the nation fan those emotional flames of fury into a tremendous conflagration of permitting a subsidized press to take up the war cry, and with scare headlines and horrible pictures work upon the imagination of the frenzied populace. From both stage and pulpit is sent the thought of war. Millions of yards of moving picture films depict the battles of the past as suggestions to arouse the fighting blood of the fighting subjects of the nation, and finally war is declared. Husbands and fathers leave their families to suffer from cold and hunger. Sons forsake their aged, helpless mothers, making them dependent upon the grudging charity of the town or city where they live. With aching hearts and tearful eyes, sweethearts separate not to meet again, and all because the rulers of the nations demand these sacrifices in the name of patriotism. And what is patriotism? Will thinking finite minds ever stop fighting long enough to learn the real meaning of that word? Is the nation that invades another nation for conquest patriotic? Because the ruler of a nation, in his egotism and selfishness, believes himself to be the chosen one of infinite mind. Is it patriotic for that finite minds who compose that nation to go to battle in order that their ruler may get the control of another nation that has the same rights to freedom that they have? What fantasies are these? How much have finite minds evolved since they were tribes instead of nations? There is an unwritten law which says, destruction destroys itself, which is another way of saying that like attracts like, and when an animal or a finite mind begins a destructive career, it attracts to itself the great primal destructive force of nature. And this force, sometimes, like a flood, surrounds and completely submerges that inharmonious mind. It brings, for that mind's selection, all the disintegrating thoughts it had absorbed from the destructive minds. This destructive force of infinite mind is like a broad, deep, dirty waterway that is crowded with boats of all kinds and descriptions. Each boat that persists in sailing there becomes laden with destructive things, and as the boats meet and pass each other, some of their cargoes are exchanged. But soon or late, each boat becomes overladen with the evil things it carries, and through collision with another, or by its inability to carry its load further, it goes down into the depth of that destructive, disintegrating force, and through corroding influences, loses its form forever. In proportion to its power, the operation of the law of attraction as directed by infinite mind produces creations more numerous and varied than are the creations of infinite minds. This is due to the fact that the limitations produced by individual selfishness and egotism do not operate in infinite mind. Infinite mind creates forms only for its temporary expression. It knows that its forms are temporary and regards them as such, while finite minds create forms which they hope and believe will be permanent. However beautiful or desirable a creation may be, it is impossible for it to become a permanency in nature or the universe. For even the so-called eternal hills must sometime crumble and give way before that invincible, disintegrating, destructive, infinite force which levels the mountains, elevates the plains, and grinds the rocks into powder. Nothing can stand forever before that force and retain its original form, because it is the destructive aspect of infinite mind. Suns may burn for what seems to be eons to finite minds. The moon and stars may reflect their light for ages. The planets may swing in space, following their orbits and fulfilling their missions for millions of years. Comets may appear and disappear. Meteors may blaze and burst and fall. But there comes a time when all these creations of infinite mind, like the incandescent lamps made by finite minds, will flame up and go out, extinguished by that overpowering, reactionary, disintegrating force which eventually destroys all forms everywhere in the universe. Infinite mind loves its expressions of thought only so long as they are actively useful instruments for it to use. Because they have served it once, infinite mind does not waste time or space in preserving worn-out, useless things. When an instrument, through crystallization or lack of magnetic power, becomes a clot in the universe, it is destroyed and its atoms are used to create a better and a more powerful form, one that will be more efficient in the evolutionary scheme. For in proportion to the way nature hates a vacuum and fills it, so infinite mind abhors uselessness and destroys it. During the period of its activity, infinite mind will have action in the universe. It will not tolerate drones in its great hive of energy. Progress and production from all its forms of thought expressions are required. Progress and production combined compose the driving force of the edict that went throughout all space on the morning of this great day of evolution. And progress and production will be required of every individualized center in the universe until the great night comes on and infinite mind rests. It is only to the finite mind that forms seem to be eternal, and this is because it wants them to be. For finite mind clings to the things it loves to look upon and to possess, and for a season becomes completely submerged in them. It dwells too long in its own creations, and this is because it admires and loves them too much. It does not wish to escape, but of its own free will becomes a slave to its own material things. When this is true of finite mind, it becomes so circumscribed by its possessions that it is limited by them and no longer expands beyond the limitations it has made for itself. It resents disturbances and wishes to be left alone with its creation as they are. This condition is due to its fears and its lack of foresight. Like the child in the dark, it does not know what the future has in store for it and fears what it does not understand. In contradistinction to infinite mind, it is so satisfied with its own creations that it continually tries to preserve them. It regrets past efforts that have failed and mourns for departed friends and things that have been taken away. It is sorry for itself and becomes discouraged when its creations fail to do its bidding. It is selfish where infinite mind is selfless. It is penurious with its productions where infinite mind is lavish in its distribution of forms. Finite mind hurries because it does not know that the time for its creation is unlimited, and it worries because it does not know that it can accomplish all that it undertakes to do, if it will but persevere in its efforts. The finite mind, as compared with infinite mind, is sometimes like a salt water slough that has been separated from the sea. By the continued washing of sand and debris, there has been made a temporary barrier between the sea and the slough. The greater the barrier grows and the longer it exists, the more isolated and impure the slough becomes until it finally loses all resemblance to its source. And if it was not within it a spring of pure fresh water to increase and to clarify it, then it becomes a stagnant, slimy pool filled with all sorts of degenerate and dying things that become an unmitigated offense to the senses. It is the barriers that are created and allowed to stand between infinite and finite minds that cause the limitations to the finite. And those barriers are made of various kinds of mental states. Sometimes they are deceitfulness, anger, and lust. Sometimes they are selfishness and fear of individual loss. For the finite mind desires to get things rather than to be good. It wishes to have and to hold what it thinks it possesses. It does not know that with the ebb and flow of the tide of infinite mind, all that goes out in one day will be replaced by something fresher and better the next. And so, with its greed to possess more and more, and with its fear of losing what it has, it builds the barrier higher and stronger between it and its source of supply, and then becomes angry or unhappy in its belief that the infinite mind has forsaken or is afflicting it. Sometimes the element of self-appreciation becomes so prominent in a finite mind that it becomes very vain of all its small successes. Egotism always grows out of too much self-esteem, and with every added new possession, it becomes more and more convinced that it is a stronger and a more efficient mind than any other. Soon it becomes imbued with the desire to direct other minds and to rule their bodies. It wishes to make others subservient to its will and begins by giving directions to others. It assumes the position of self-appointed director or dictator over the affairs of other minds, and after many reincarnations, it may become a king or a queen or a president. Many experiences are required in many different forms of expression before a finite mind may become the ruler of a nation. But where there is a strong will to do a thing, a way will always be found. And after many struggles and failures, the desired position will be gained. Then comes the belief that the zenith of honor and preferment has been reached, that there is nothing higher or greater to be had by finite mind. It believes its powers and possessions are established as supreme, and, becoming filled with pompous satisfaction, it begins to crystallize unless it finds that somewhere there is another finite mind who is attempting to do what it has done. Then comes the desire for conquest, the disappointment and chagrin of finding itself not the absolute ruler of the destinies of all other minds fills it with jealousy. Resentment and bitterness come and flood it with the determination to possess and to control other nations and to depose their rulers. Sometimes, in its egotism and ignorance, it becomes imbued in the belief that it was born to be an instrument of infinite mind, to crush any living thing that stands upright in opposition to itself and to its desires. So it works its little self into a frenzy of what it calls patriotic enthusiasm. It orders its subjects to appear in audience and lectures them upon the subject of patriotism. It declares that infinite mind, God, is with it in all its thoughts and purposes. With flashing eyes and thunderous tones, it promises its subjects that it and God will conquer every other finite mind on land or sea and make them all subservient to it. Paradoxically, it calls upon the infinite mind to become its battle god and to help its human warriors to crush all finite minds who rule where it would like to rule and who possess what it would like to have. This greedy, selfish egotist would make a servant of the power it pretends to worship and orders it about as if it were a corporal's guard. It dares to command Almighty God to serve it in its selfish purposes and directs its Creator to help it slay its fellow man. Just why it claims such servitude from infinite mind may be quite obscure to other finite minds, but the fact remains, it does. And if by force of arms and by a great cunning, this greedy finite mind succeeds in its designs and gains its ends and purposes, then it makes the boast and justifies itself by saying that it was infinite mind, God, who perched itself upon the standards and the banners of its conquering armies, and through brutal bloodshed and terrific suffering, helped it to win the victory. And should that murderous finite mind, without restraint or interruption, continue in its career of bloodshed for possession, then every other finite mind would lose its independence and become its slave. There would be no peace, no progress, nor any freedom anywhere for other finite minds. That conquering mind with military force would rule all other minds, and, machine-like, every mind under its bondage would be compelled to think and act and live to please its ruler. And that ruling mind, self-satisfied and strong, would become so crystallized in its conceit that it could not expand beyond the limitations it had created for itself. But imbued with a desire to possess, there would be no limit to what it would acquire. It would, indeed, become the emperor of this world. But before that selfish triumph could be attained, would come the disintegrating, repelling, destructive force of infinite mind as an equilibratory influence and begin its work. Unexpected things would occur. A blight would fall upon the crops, and food would become scarce for those whom that egotist ruled. Disease would appear in its military camps, and warriors would disappear before its ravages. Fires and floods would destroy its munitions of war and the mills producing them. Ships which should bring relief would be sunk, and all their cargoes would go to feed the fishes. Earthquakes and tidal waves would destroy the abiding places of warriors, wives, and children, and an unaccountable and paralyzing fear of approaching evil would come upon the finite minds of all the warriors who had been left to fight upon the battlefields without their old companions. They would lose their courage and their energy, and then to each and every finite mind would be bearing the burdens of the war. The thought would come, "What are you fighting for?" And when that question thought was passed from mind to mind, the warriors would whisper to themselves and to each other, "What are we fighting for?" And soon that same questioning thought would come to that egotist, the finite mind, who had planned the war, and it would then be forced to recognize the futility of further effort to conquer other finite minds or to enslave them. Then, in the stillness of a night, when it was all alone with infinite mind surrounding it, a picture of the past would appear and pass before it as if it were a funeral train. That finite mind would see every incident that had occurred during its present form of expression. Slowly those pictures would pass, one after the other, as every incident in one's life passes by the mental vision of one whose soul is being required, and there, written in the book of judgment and held up for that finite mind to read, would be shown how greed and envy and desire for power had colored all its vision and had fashioned all its judgment. How self-appreciation had grown into vanity, and vanity into a supreme conceit. With sadness, that finite mind would see how it had prevented millions of other finite minds from working out their destinies, as they would have done, uninfluenced and uninflamed by its passionate desire for power. It would see the tiny forms of expression of finite minds who had not reached maturity and who had been robbed of their immediate future experiences. And then it would remember that all those cruel things had been done at its command. All the outrages that had been committed by its warriors and all the crimes that had been perpetrated against their unhappy victims had been approved by it. And bowing its head in sorrowful humility, it would be compelled to say, "For all these things, O God, I am to blame." And the contrition felt by that egotist that would be conqueror of the world would show that progress had been made in its evolvement, since compassion and contrition, two of the highest emotions that finite minds may feel, are attributes only of the evolving finite mind. And in a like manner will the destructive force of infinite mind demolish all state, church, social, and political combinations after they have done their constructive work and they have crystallized into unyielding, unbending, unprogressive institutions. So long as the church was imbued with the spirit of love, and so long as its members and its priests were filled with compassion for each other and for all mankind, great draughts of infinite love and inspiration were being drawn into it, and it was a living, throbbing, soulful thing created and maintained for the uplifting of the hopeless, helpless souls who came to it for refuge and relief. When men and women worshipped God on the banks of a stream and in the woods, when their meeting places were beneath the blue vault of heaven and among the flowers and the birds, their hearts were tender with love and sympathy, inspired by the infinite constructive force. Then they were evolving upward and onward, mentally and spiritually. But when desire for individual aggrandizement crept into the hearts of some of the members of those simple organizations, when one of their members began to plan how he could make a living for himself and for his family at the expense of all the other members, then the infinite destructive force began to manifest as individual selfishness, and the bonds of love and sympathy which had united those friends and brothers began to disintegrate. But even then, all members of that small society were not selfishly inclined. There were those whose hearts were filled with love and who were willing to make sacrifices for each other, and even for the one who wished to receive and not to give. And so the constructive force still continued to exceed in power the destructive force, and the organization still continued to attract new members and to grow in usefulness. After that came the desire for church possessions. The small society wished to have a home, an abiding place of its own. The fields and woods were no longer satisfying to some of its members. There must be builded an edifice, and sacrifices must be made by all the members to build a church. And then, with hearts full of love and devotion toward their beloved society and toward each other, and with the belief that their meetings would be more productive of good to all if they were to be held within walls and beneath a roof, they began the creation of a church building. And here the infinite destructive force began manifesting as individual selfishness again, when some of the members of that small society saw an opportunity to gain a benefit by taking charge of the building of that new church and by controlling the funds provided for its construction by the simple, trusting members of the society. And here again, graft and greed appeared, and like the serpent in the Eden garden of the supposed originators of the human race, raised their selfish heads and declared that this was an opportunity for someone to acquire an individual benefit at someone else's expense. And here was where church trustees and treasurers were made. In the beginning of the disruption of a society, church or state, it is the infinite destructive force that tempts the leaders and those having authority to be dishonest. And this destructive force may be called by any name, and its effects upon finite minds may be condemned as evil, or it may be condoned and called unfortunate. It exists because it must, and it will continue to affect finite minds until they have become harmonious and constructive in all their parts. Then there will be no sympathetic vibrations between the infinite destructive force and such developed finite minds. And then cyclones may pass them by, and they will be unscathed by fire or flood, by earthquakes or by pestilence, for imbued with infinite constructive power, a protecting wall of harmonious vibrations will surround each finite mind who dwells in peace and love within it. When the infinite constructive force was creating the heavens and the earth, it created the mineral and vegetable kingdoms and established them within and upon the world, which was to become the abiding place of finite minds and of animals. These two kingdoms were made, not alone for decorative purposes, but also to serve for food and medicines. It was out of itself that the substance came to make all things that ever existed, and therefore there is not one blade of grass, or weed, or clod of earth, or stone, or anything that can be seen that is not a part of infinite mind in some stage or grade of development. The atoms that compose the minerals and the earth are not so far advanced in their development as are the atoms used to make the flowers, grasses, and trees. But there are essences in every mineral and in the earth which plants may draw upon, which give them life and strength and beauty. For in the laboratory of nature, the constructive force of infinite mind works constantly to bring the lower higher, that new forms for its expression may be made. It is the sole essence of the mineral lead, the lowest and most poisonous of all the metals in the earth, that, when combined with the essence of common salt, produces iron ore. And it is the soul or essence of the iron ore, when combined with the essence of mercury, that makes the diamond. And so it is that in the dark, damp earth, away from the sunshine and pure air, and hidden from the gaze of finite minds, infinite mind works constantly, pulverizing and separating, extracting and combining its mineral creations to bring them into higher and better and more beautiful forms. Then, out of those apparently lifeless minerals, infinite mind brings upward into the roots of flowers, shrubs, and trees the mineral essences that give to them a strength and beauty as wonderful as are in the diamond, the ruby, the sapphire, the emerald, and in all other precious and semi-precious stones. Gold and silver, copper and tin, each are the products of a combination of the essences or souls from lower mineral forms. And it is some of these same essences which, when absorbed from foods and medicines, give health and strength to animal and men. But there are finite minds who, in their limitations caused by their ignorance of the laws which govern life, refuse a knowledge of these truths. They ignore the handiwork of infinite mind in nature, or, denouncing it, they call it error, and try to relegate it to the realm of mortal mind, wherever that may be. But closing eyes to truth or denying its existence does not destroy the truth. And he who shuts himself away from sunlight neither destroys the sun nor extinguishes its light, but only deprives himself of that which sunlight gives to everything that looks upon it and lives within it. And the finite mind is ignorant indeed, who does not know that infinite mind creates, composes, controls, and is a part of every material expression of itself within the universe. And whether that expression be above, below, or on a parallel with finite minds, it is a part of infinite mind, and its value is determined by its usefulness. As a scrap of rusty iron may be thrown back into the melting pot of the smelter to be cleansed of rust and dirt, so are finite minds forced back again and again into the melting pot of experience by infinite mind to be purified and cleansed of their imperfections. For nothing in all the universe is lost or wasted. It is but the individual forms of expression of infinite mind that are molded and remolded to suitably express the essences or souls within them. When infinite mind created animal and human forms, it used again the atoms that had been combined before in mineral and vegetable forms and essences, and this is why animal and human bodies contain, in blood, bone, and tissue, the same elements that are found in minerals and in plants. It was many hundred years ago that ancient wise men learned this truth, and students of the occult laws of nature have been working ever since to demonstrate to other finite minds this knowledge. Analogy and research have shown these students that there are but three primal elements that enter into the composition of mineral, vegetable, and animal creations, and these three elements are the souls or essences of salt, sulfur, and of mercury. And any material form of expression that lacks one or more of these three essences in proper proportions is lacking in its strength and fails to be an efficient instrument through which a mind or soul may be expressed. And so these ancient wise men taught their students how to look for food and medicines in the mineral and vegetable kingdoms, and how to extract those precious essences and fluids, and how to prepare them that they should be used constructively to supply the needs of men and animals. Experience has shown that there are essences constructive and essences destructive to human and animal forms. That the destructive force of infinite mind operates in the mineral and vegetable kingdoms, as does its constructive force, and therefore finite minds who are on the constructive side of nature do not use in their work of healing and in providing food the destructive essences. The physician who gives his patient poisonous essences is not constructive. He is not a restorer, but instead is a destroyer of human and animal forms. He who injects into the veins of a human being or of an animal a poisonous essence for the purpose of creating harmonious conditions in that body is as wise as was the man whom Mother Goose described, he who jumped into a bramble bush and scratched out both his eyes. And when he saw his eyes were out, with all his might and main, he jumped into another bush to scratch them in again. Even the infantile consciousness can discover the futility of such reckless imbecility and is amused by it. There are physicians who claim that poisons in the human or animal system can be overcome by adding other and more powerful poisons to them. Is a broken levee mended by forcing a flood of water through the break? Or is a conflagration destroyed by adding more fuel to the fire? It is true that a powerful poison united with a weaker poison may change the expression of the lesser one, but another and a greater inharmonious condition will be produced by the combination. And while the victim may appear to have been cured of the first distressed condition, there will follow a worse one produced by the addition of more destructive medicine. There is the modern surgeon who believes in removing every organ from the human or animal body that it can exist without. The tonsils must be removed to prevent tonsillitis. The vermiform appendix must be removed to prevent appendicitis. The uterus and ovaries must be removed to prevent congestion, nervousness, and hysteria. A stomach must be removed to prevent indigestion. A kidney must be removed to prevent or to cure Bright's disease. The gallbladder must be removed to prevent gallstones. And when will they remove the eyes to prevent blindness? If the modern wise men would study the work of the ancient wise men, they would learn through their investigations to be constructionists instead of destructionists. They would learn through their investigations of nature's occult secrets that there are essences that may be extracted from herbs and minerals that will not only cure every ill that a man or an animal may be afflicted with, but they would learn that for every organ in the material body of man and beast, and for every nerve center, and for every gland, there is a ganglia in its brain which corresponds, and through which the mind operates to control those glands, organs, and nerve centers. And they would also learn that when any of the various parts of the human or animal mechanism have been removed, and there is nothing for the corresponding ganglia in the brain to do, it becomes atrophied, and much of the brain usefulness to the mind is lost thereby. It is a popular belief of intelligent individuals that the bodies of men and of animals reach a limit of age usefulness at about 5 times the length of time required to reach maturity. But ancient wise men demonstrated the fact, by their experiences and experimentations, that by judicious and persistent use of the constructive essences contained in minerals and plants, the life and usefulness of the bodies and the brains of men and animals may be extended much beyond the limit of age put upon them by popular belief. Is it because modern scientists are too egotistic, too self-satisfied, and too vain of the infinitesimal fragments of information and misinformation that they possess that they do not search further? Or is it because there may be no money to be made by such research? Is it true that real wisdom is at a discount these days in the 20th century, and perhaps that is the reason scientists do not search for it? End of chapter. Chapter 14. Judgment Day. Every soul, whether upon the subjective or objective plane of being, is now just where it has placed itself, and there is neither a God, a man, or a devil to bless or to blame for its present condition. And when men, who believe themselves the unfortunate victims of circumstances, and see and realize this truth, they will either begin to improve their mental, physical, and financial conditions, or give up the struggle for evolvement, waiting for dead men's shoes or fairy godmothers to bring wealth and honor is the result of mental or physical laziness, of gross inefficiency, or of dense ignorance of the operations of the laws that govern progress. And each of these defects of character may be compared to the tying of a millstone to the neck of a swimmer. He does not get far, however great his effort. Waiting for something to turn up is deadening to energy and disappointing to hopes. Time is one of the most valuable assets an evolving ego possesses, and to waste it in waiting for something that may never come is a crime against the soul. It has been said that procrastination is the thief of time, and to the individual who knows the value of time, this statement is one of the truest things he ever heard. But for the time killer, the man who has so much time he knows not what to do with it, procrastination is his principal occupation. It is true he never attains, but there are many who do not wish to attain and prefer stultification because it is easy to get. Then there is that miserable, indefinite, irresponsible, shifting thing called bad luck that keeps a man from achieving. And what is bad luck? Where did it come from and who created it? It must have had a cause, since nothing in the universe came into existence without one. It is true there are individuals who, from the moment they begin cutting their baby teeth, pass from one calamity into another, and their so-called misfortunes are all attributed to bad luck. Then there is the man who shifts the cause of his misfortunes to the stars. He says he has had bad luck since he can remember anything and has but recently discovered the cause. That his horoscope shows he was born under bad astrological conditions, and it has been the stars that have kept him from succeeding in life. He admits that his efforts have been spasmodic because he had to watch his stars to avoid the accidents and disasters that might have come to him. He dared not start a business venture until all his good planets should be harmoniously assembled in his midheaven or in some other equally benefic position, and since such a constellation as he desires comes in a man's life only about once in 30 years, he has been waiting for a long time for the right astrological conditions to do something for him. In the meantime, he has been too busy dodging the fiery bolts from Mars, the serpentine thrust from Saturn, and the sledgehammer blows from Uranus to make any constructive efforts in his own behalf. After such an existence as this man has led, how could he expect anything better than his present poverty-stricken condition? The only difference between him and he who believes himself the victim of just plain bad luck is this: the man afraid of his stars thinks he knows the cause of his trouble and blames the stars for it, and the other man does not know the cause of his misfortunes and blames everybody but himself for them. The occultist says there is no such thing as bad luck, as men understand the term. That so-called bad luck is always the result of bad judgment or of a transgression of law in a past or the present life. That so-called bad astrological conditions in this life are the result of bad judgment and the consequent mistakes made in a former life. That effects must and will follow causes, and laws transgressed either ignorantly or willfully bring unavoidable results. He also says a progressive ego will not wait for anything or for anybody to do things for or to give things to, but gets up and goes after whatever it wants, regardless of stars and conditions. And if it has a sufficient amount of determination and perseverance, it will get what it goes after, and that without robbing another. But if it has not the necessary determination and perseverance required for performing such a dynamic feat, then it should begin at once to cultivate those qualities until they are gained. The only disgrace attendant upon labor is that of not doing it well. And since hands and feet and brain were made to use in the acquirement of knowledge, it is only possible for a soul to gain it through the use of those bodily attributes. If a woman is afraid of soiling her hands or of breaking her fingernails, she will never get far in search for knowledge. And if a man is content to let someone else do work and then tell him about it, he will never remember what he has been told, and the individual who did the work got the experience that gave him the knowledge he wanted. If a man is afraid of losing his rest and reposes comfortably upon his bed while someone else burns the midnight oil, in an effort to work out some of the problems of life, the sleepy man will waken sometime to find himself in the rear of the procession while the man who used his brain and his oil leads it. And since it is either fear or laziness, mental or physical, which retards and possibly destroys the evolvement of an ego, and since it is in one or both of these faults in the human soul that all other bad qualities find root, the first work the earnest student should do is to uproot and cast out from his heart's garden those two obnoxious weeds, fear and laziness. There is the greedy individual who wishes to claim for his own the fruits of the labors of another. Mental vanity makes him crave the admiration and the homage of his fellows, which he knows he does not deserve. He wishes to pose for what he is not, and makes claims to knowledge and power that are entirely beyond his reach. Without hesitancy, the paraphrases another work and gives as his own the ideas he has stolen. That individual is as great a thief as he who steals a purse or an overcoat. The Nazarene occultist said, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." And according to the same principle, be sure that full credit is given to every other individual for what he has done. Make no false pretenses, for he who poses for what he is not, by his own pretensions, acknowledges his mental and spiritual poverty, and his dishonesty shall be exposed. For the time is here, now, when every individual, whether he be a churchman, a statesman, a politician, a leader of society, or a common laborer, shall be known for what he is and nothing more. Because of the iniquitous manner of living, the hands of the gods are being laid heavily upon the peoples of this earth, for they have sinned consciously and willfully against each other, and have called upon God to help them in their sinning. They have set apart hours and days, during which time they have made prayers, asking God to aid them in killing their fellow men, and they have tortured and robbed each other. Through the force of arms, they have taken away that which they could not replace or restore, and through the mandates of their rulers, they have invaded the homes and have destroyed the happiness of those helpless to resist them. Through their desire for power and possessions, men have forgotten or ignored the rights of others and have ruthlessly destroyed or appropriated for their own selfish purposes whatsoever they desire to have belonging to others. Piracy has been practiced upon the land and upon the sea, but the day of reckoning is at hand, and every man, woman, or child who has aided in sinning against another man, woman, or child shall pay the full penalty for the crime. Retribution individually shall come, and it will not be the sins of the fathers visited upon the children of any other generation than this, but it will be the sins of each individual that will be visited upon himself. It will not be the aggressors by war alone who will meet their punishment now, but it will be the wife-beaters, the gamblers, the drunkards, and the adulterers of both sexes, the unfaithful parents and the dishonorable children. It will be those who have done to others what they would not have done to themselves. Think not, those who have been blinded by ignorance and selfishness, that justice is dead, or that one individual can escape the consequences of his acts, for he cannot. For this is the summing up time for the lawyer and the judge. It is the cashing in time for the banker and the businessman. It is the evening of the last day of grace for the churchman and for all other individuals. The time is up. And those who have not transgressed against another will be helpless to aid the transgressor, or, in the least degree, to delay or prevent his punishment. And those who, for a reason or without one, attempt to protect or to conceal the transgressor, or to prevent him from receiving the consequences of his acts shall, as a violator of the law of justice, be punished with the transgressor. From the hilltops and from the valleys, from the mountain peaks and from the caverns, on the seas and from the river bottoms will come the souls that must be judged. From the palaces and from the hovels, from the barracks, tents, and dugouts will be summoned souls to meet their judgment. And there will be no human witnesses needed to testify either for or against each soul, since each will bring the pictures made by his own thoughts and acts. Upon the screen that he himself has created, and which envelops him as a cloud, are printed every act, every purpose and desire, both fulfilled and unfulfilled. Every hope and aspiration, every resolution made and broken will be seen by those who read and judge each individual soul. Then there will be no caste or class, no favored ones. The soul whose record is the best will stand the highest and will receive full credit for all that it deserves. There will be no man-made distinctions then. The king, the queen, the priest, the nun, the rich, the poor will stand alike before that bar of justice, and the questions asked will be, what have you done to others? What measures have you meted to your fellows? What suffering have you caused? What happiness have you given? What has your influence been, and what was your example? Have your thoughts and deeds been constructive or destructive, and which predominated in number and degree? For it is not alone what a soul believes that rises or lowers, it is in its evolvement, but what it does. And since every individual mind is a part of that great consciousness, ever seeking individual experiences through expression, whatever one part of it does to another part is done to what man call God. When the Nazarene said, whatsoever you have done to one of the least one of these, you have also done to me, he taught this truth. And it will not only be what have you done to the other parts of the great consciousness who have reached the human stage of action and understanding, but it will also be what have you done to every other part of that is coming upward toward the human stage. It is the individualizing mind or soul who thinks independently for itself, whether it be that of a man or of an animal, who will be held accountable in this great day of reckoning. And every thinking soul will be judged according to its real value and understanding. Then the leaners will be deprived of their props and must stand for themselves or fall. And the individual who has depended upon some strong character to assume its responsibilities will be made to realize that for the remainder of its evolutionary journey, it must assume its own responsibilities and solve its own problems. After those days of judgment have passed, there will be no more prayers offered to God in which men will ask that they be made to their duties. Men will not ask God to give them clean hearts and lofty purposes, because they will then know that if their hearts are unclean, they themselves must purify them. And if their purposes are not honorable, then they must make them what they desire them to be. And men will also understand that there is no God in all the universe who will remove the consequences of their mistakes. But every mistake, whether ignorantly or willfully made, must be paid for by the individual who makes it. As a consequence, for a time during that period of judgment, the social conditions on this material plane of consciousness will be chaotic, as it was in cosmos during the fourth period of this cosmic day, when the heavens were filled with blazing worlds and sulphurous comets, and when the suns were but unrestrained centers of bursting flaming energy. So shall it be, but in a lesser degree, with the social conditions on this material plane. For as it is above, so it must sometime be below. Then the artificiality of the present social fabric, of the present so-called civilization, will be torn into shreds. And as the dead and dying leaves in the forest are driven before the strong winds of autumn, so shall the shreds of the present social fabric be scattered. Then will come restoration for such individuals as have passed through the adjustment period. And as each world and sun found its orbit in the fifth cosmic period, and as out of chaos came order and harmony in the heavens, then so will every individual soul find its place and do its work without fear or friction. And there will be real brotherly love and genuine friendships in those days. There will be no need for Yale locks or burglar alarms, since no man then will covet his neighbor's possessions. Swords will be beaten into plowshares, and guns will be melted into constructive instead of destructive instruments. There will be no courts of injustice in those days, and fighting men who have come through the adjustment period will not be boasting of the number of men they have killed, but will be glad to forget them and have others forget that they ever went to war. And there will be plenty of health and wealth and happiness for the taking for those who have earned them, and the new Aquarian cycle of evolution for this world will be entered into with peace and plenty for all who have passed the judgment. End of chapter. And also this concludes the reading of the book titled Fragments of Truth by Richard Ingalese and Isabella Ingalese. Please do hit the like button, share this with like-minded friends, leave a comment what has been the favorite part of this book if you've made it through with me, and yes, subscribe to the channel. Let's see what else I can bring for you. Be blessed.